Darth Plagueis was a man known for having a deep-seated fear of death, bred into him and orchestrated by his master Darth Terminus. His fear of death is what drove him to obsessing over the midichlorians in order to find a path to immortality. Plagueis was someone who didn't believe in the mysticism of the Force in the slightest, and did not believe in any afterlife, whether that was good or bad. The idea that everything just went black one day absolutely petrified the Dark Lord, especially if it happened before his time was ready. While this fear dictated a large portion of his Sith career, a single event would cause Plagueis to have a downward spiral into paranoia. An assassination attempt which nearly claimed his life on Coruscant, which would traumatize him so badly that it became the catalyst towards his eventual self-sabotaging downfall. So what happened that fateful day when the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise came within a breath of happening 2 decades before it was intended, and how was it enough to actually disturb the mind of a logical Sith Lord? Well, settle in as we open a holocron and discuss Plagueis' fear of sleep. It had now been well over 10 years since Palpatine had begun his training with Higo Damask, the man who was Plagueis. In this time, they had not only trained in the dark side of the Force, but they also had been advancing in their political careers. The grand plan at this point was sort of being made up as they went along. They had a straw man plan which included Palpatine bidding for the office of the Supreme Chancellor, and eventually choosing to elect Higo Damask as his co-chancellor. But a lot of pieces needed to fall in place before all of that could occur, such as deals with the Trade Federation and all kinds of friends within the Senate. But with these friends came enemies as well, and both Palpatine and Higo Damask had become public figures due to all of their political and financial exploits. No one was any the wiser that they were secretly Dark Lords of the Sith, or that they even knew each other beyond the meetings that they had in the public eye. However, there was one group of political rivals that were extremely suspicious of Higo Damask and Palpatine: the Grand Protectorate of Malastare, an extremely corrupt group who ruled the world of Malastare and wanted to keep their 2 rivals out of business from the Senate. They smelled the secret of the Sith Lords, knowing that they were planning something big, although they lacked the details. What was clear though, is that they had a political plan to achieve as much power as possible. And because of this, Malastare wanted to change this to serve their own goals. They had already kidnapped Palpatine once before and attempted to kill him behind closed doors. But before Sidious needed to actually do anything, he was rescued by the Coruscant Sun Guard. Since the Grand Protectorate had been incriminated by having Palpatine kidnapped, they were now on the run from the Sun Guard and both Sith Lords. But the Dark Lords believed that with this immense pressure, that they would no longer be any sort of issue. But the Sith were wrong, something that was rare, which is where our scene opens today. Plagueis, wearing the mask of Higo Damask, was in a meeting of a secret moon fraternity known as the Order of the Canted Circle. Their order was essentially a secret society for the elite beings who controlled many aspects of commerce and business in the stars. This society was complete with symbolism, secret handshakes, and even rituals, such as one where Higo Damask was attending this day. Plagueis himself was not a part of this order, as he didn't want the high officials digging too much into his background and finding incriminating details about his true identity. He was treated as an honorary member because of all of his influence and wealth. On this day, they were initiating an individual by the name of Larsh Hill into the order, Larsh being the father of San Hill, the moon who would be in charge of the banking clan and would join with the separatist movement in the Clone War, all because Higo Damask was a close friend of the Larsh family. He was invited to watch their initiation ceremony. Within a small building on the lower levels of Coruscant, the Order of the Canted Circle all stood within a room wearing ceremonial black robing. The leader of the order and about 3 dozen other hooded figures and black-robed individuals entered the room to begin the ritual. In the hands of the high official at the meeting, there was a circular pendant emblematic of the order that all of the members got upon initiation. But as this happened, Plagueis got a sudden sense of foreboding. The Force was issuing him a warning. Something was very, very wrong. The dark side fell upon Plagueis like a shroud, and he should have acted on this instinct. But he restrained himself for fear of revealing his true nature. Unfortunately for him, this proved to be a massive mistake, as many things occurred in the span of a single instant that would change Plagueis forever. As Larsh Hill bowed before the high official and received the pendant, suddenly, the high official yanked downward on the necklace, revealing it to be razor sharp. With that swift motion, Larsh Hill's head was now off his shoulders and rolling quickly across the floor. Suddenly, from all of the robed men that had entered the circle, decapitation discs went flying around the room, lopping off the heads of the rest of the moons in the society and members of the order. Heads were flung wildly around the ceremonial chambers. Not even the sun guards present were fast enough to respond with their blasters, and the razor decapitation discs made quick work of them as well. These hooded men were in actuality Maladian assassins. They had disguised themselves as members of the circle, and they were extremely skilled in dealing death. Maladians were a cult of highly skilled assassins, a group known for honoring every contract they were given, no matter the target. It could be the Chancellor himself, the Grand Master even. In fact, the Maladians had a reputation that they were capable of killing Jedi. They had no qualms about facing Force-sensitive opponents, but they did not know something very important. Hego Damask, their primary target, was no simple Force wielder, although they didn't know that either. Plagueis was a Dark Lord of the Sith. Unfortunately, he had made a mistake. Plagueis denied reacting upon instinct. He now felt that one of these discs had grazed him on the side of his throat and his face, altering him forever. In the blade's passing, it had hacked off a chunk of his jawbone and even a piece of his neck, severing his trachea and several blood vessels along with it. Hego Damask fell to the ground, using the Force to keep the wound contained and ensuring that he did not die from blood loss. Being of the moon species, he had 3 hearts, but one of them was starting to fail due to fibrillation. This was extremely bad. Using Sith techniques, Plagueis used 2 of his hearts to compensate for the one, as Plagueis could feel he was in danger of becoming arrhythmic. He didn't have his lightsaber with him since he was out as a public figure, a mistake his apprentice would later take note of, so Plagueis would have to entirely rely on the Force if he was to survive at all. A quick side note, we really don't have a lot of feats of Darth Plagueis in open combat, so this story is really important, not only in the overall history and life of Plagueis, but this is truly the best example of what the Dark Lord was capable of in terms of power. Let's continue. Meanwhile, Sidious was in his penthouse awaiting instruction from his master after having finished his assignment. But that is when the individual by the name of Sate Pestage burst into his office in a panic, stating that he had received a tip from one of the Maladian commanders that had owed him a favor. This information stated that he had received a high-profile contract with someone involved in Damask Holdings. While Pestage had worried that the hit was for Palpatine, Sidious was dubious, and so opened himself up to the Force. In that moment, Palpatine was hit with a massive wave of dark side energy being unleashed somewhere on a nearby planet. He could feel Plagueis' power. In that moment, Palpatine knew that it was his master. He was the one who was on the receiving end of this contract. But if Sidious felt that power, then the Jedi certainly would have sensed it as well. And so Palpatine and Sate Pestage rushed to the Canted Circle, determined to save Plagueis before it was too late. Back at the embassy, Plagueis was trying to keep himself from bleeding out while the assassins circled him, finishing off the rest of the moons on the floor. But now the Sith Lord leaped off the floor, unleashing his fury and revealing his true identity as a Lord of the Sith. The assassins that came for him were flung back to a nearby wall. Others had their necks instantly snapped. And yet, more had their lives ended when Plagueis plunged his fist through their armored chests, his body now enhanced by the Force. Plagueis then clapped his hands together, turning loose every object in the room into a storm of deadly projectiles. The assassins, having dealt before with Jedi, did not run, but simply changed tactics and surrounded the Dark Lord. Plagueis would have broken the will of any other assassin in the galaxy, but not the Maladians. Plagueis attempted to unleash Force lightning, but one of his other hearts was beginning to fail as well, interrupting his attack due to the paralyzing pain. The assassins leapt at Plagueis in groups, but were repelled by a Force barrier. Plagueis then unleashed a scream, pushing past his now ragged vocal cords. It erupted from him like a sonic weapon, shattering the eardrums of all within 10 feet and stunning those outside of his immediate range. With his bare hands, Plagueis began smashing skulls and windpipes, only stopping to unleash a force wave, one that all but atomized the bodies of 6 Maladians, a perfectly executed force repulse. In the moment of panic and survival mode, Plagueis was throwing everything he had, but the attackers were many, and he was only one. The full force of the dark side was coming against them. Despite Plagueis being incredibly wounded and on the verge of death, he was not finished. Plagueis, however, was growing slow from his injuries to move out of the way when the assassins fell upon him again with their vibroblades. But in that moment, Sidious and Pastage burst into the room. Sate had a repeating blaster and began taking out every assassin within sight. Sidious fled to his master's side and helped him back on his feet. Now it was time for the rule of 2. The Dark Lords unleashed the power of the dark side together to destroy their foes. And in that moment, Sate Pastage witnessed firsthand that Palpatine and Higo Damask were Dark Lords of the Sith, and was thus now brought into the fold officially. From that day forth, Sate would remain one of Sidious's closest and most loyal confidants, even after the fall of the Empire. Plagueis was grievously injured and required immediate medical treatment. He was also a little out of his mind following this. It required convincing from Sidious to get his master out of the building as fast as possible before the Jedi could arrive, as there would be no explaining away the carnage that was left within the room. Following, Plagueis would forever have to wear a transpirator, hiding his face and allowing him to breathe and speak normally. As is true for all Sith, Plagueis was defined by his new pain, and with this, Palpatine swore revenge. Unlike the Jedi, he was not going to wait for the long arm of the law. Palpatine would do this the Sith way, through Sith law, revenge. Sidious would make a personal visit to the Grand Protectorate Embassy, and there, he would openly reveal himself as a Sith Lord, utterly massacring every single being within the building to avenge his master. No longer was this a political dispute, it was a Sith issue, and he wasn't going to take it lying down. Unfortunately though, this vengeance did little to console Plagueis, who had grown reclusive and paranoid. Having come so close to death, he decided to hole up in his laboratory, focus exclusively on his studies of the midichlorians. He had come so close to truthfully the only thing he ever feared, death itself. For the next 2 decades, Plagueis would stay in his lab, performing experiments, shirking all political duty, leaving it solely to Palpatine. But in doing so, the Dark Lord made another mistake, allowing his apprentice to govern the grand plan of the Sith entirely, rendering himself useless as a master. Adding to this, Plagueis became a paranoid insomniac, hardly ever getting a meaningful sleep ever again. All the while, Palpatine grew more and more resentful to his master, until the day came when he would succeed him, being elected as the Supreme Chancellor. Only then did Plagueis feel safe. Only then was he content enough to have a drink and a nap on the couch of his apprentice. The final mistake. But that, my friends, was the story of Plagueis and his traumatizing encounter with an assassination attempt. To be fair, it required 36 of the most highly skilled assassins in the galaxy in a surprise attempt for them to get this far in killing the Dark Lord. And even then, Plagueis took out a significant portion of them while his body was rapidly shutting down. In this instance, we actually get to see the true power of Plagueis, which was technically still crippled due to his injuries. Had he acted on his instincts alone and not been injured initially, there is no doubt in my mind that he would have been able to single-handedly annihilate every assassin in the room with nothing but the Force alone. But of course, we do have to hand it to the Maladians for how efficient they were, despite going into the confrontation without the expectation of facing a Sith Lord. But what do you think? Did you expect this surprisingly graphic scene to be the reason why Plagueis reclused for so many years? And would you like to see more beings like the Maladian assassins on screen? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. And as always, my friends, thank you for visiting us in the archives today, and may the Force be with you.